Terrence McNally, and welcome to Freeform, a world that just might work. I'll be speaking today with entrepreneur and author Paul Hawken, founder of both Project Drawdown and Project Regeneration, about his latest book, Carbon, the Book of Life. On Freeform, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, environment, economics, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com, and podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net. Paul Hawken has been a guest a number of times. Our paths have often crossed, and we've actually worked together on occasion. I believe his new book, Carbon, takes a step back from the problem-solving approach of most of his other work and takes in and places us in the big picture, really big, if you will, starting with the origins of the universe and of life itself. He calls us to a deeper understanding of our place in that great scheme of things as absolutely essential, not just to effectively deal with the climate crisis, but also with most of the other ways in which we're falling short of what's possible in our individual lives as well as a society. Perhaps the two most significant attributes of humans are that we learn and we tell stories. We've used technology to connect the globe, and now storytellers everywhere share a story of machines. In this story, God is a watchmaker, and the universe, the earth, the human body, and all our social institutions are machines. Though they may not say so, I suspect most people see reality as dead, static, and separate, while I experience it as alive, dynamic, and interdependent. Why does the machine worldview cast such a hypnotic spell over human consciousness? We can see the natural world. We can see living systems. We experience evidence against the machine worldview daily, if we're open to it, in the clouds up in the sky or the light in a child's eyes. Yet its power over us persists. Why is that so? I believe it has to do with control. It has to do with promises, rationality, and the machine model have failed for 300 years to fulfill. It has to do with money, the perfect metaphor and medium for perpetuating a mechanical worldview. Symbolic, inedible, abstract, numerical, measurable, itself a form of measurement. Money takes us away from the living world of natural experience. And capable of surplus, it breeds greed and exploitation. We can no longer afford to believe or live this story. We need to share a new collective story of life, of biology, of living systems. Finally, let me mention an exchange Paul and I had in preparation for today. I reminded him that rather than describe myself as someone concerned about the environment, I say the goal for myself and our species must be a healthy relationship with the rest of nature. That was music to Paul's ears. Paul Hawken has founded several companies, starting in the 60s with Aeron Trading, one of the first natural food companies in the U.S., Smith & Hawken, a retail and catalog company, One Sun, an energy company focused on ultra-low-cost solar. As an author, his books include Growing a Business, The Ecology of Commerce, Blessed Unrest, Natural Capitalism, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, and his latest, Carbon, the Book of Life. He is the founder, as I said, of both Project Drawdown and Project Regeneration, the latter of which has created the world's largest, most complete list and network of solutions to the climate crisis. Welcome again, Paul Hawken, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
Thank you so much, Terrence. Be happy to see you again. Really am.
Oh, thank you. Yes, myself as well. And let me tell listeners, we're recording this conversation Thursday, April 17th. I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas we talk about. And I laid out your work as an entrepreneur, as a writer, and so on. And I sort of ask this question every time we talk, but but I assume your perspective changes a little as years go by. And you put out a book every 4 or 5 years. We talk every 4 or 5 years on the show. Just any latest sense of what your personal narrative is, how your story is unfolding from that young entrepreneur, young author to the elder I see before me.
Well, I mean, we're all a work in progress, every single one of us, and that progress is always about our experience and how we basically encounter that experience, and then our mental capacity and our spiritual capacity to reintegrate or try to integrate what it is that we're seeing and experiencing in the world. And I would say that that never changes for everybody. I'm no different than anybody else listening or watching. Um, and particularly right now, I'm trying to figure out what is the zeitgeist of the world. But for me, it's always about communicating into that so-called zeitgeist. I don't mean to every man, every woman. I mean it to people who actually are alert to what is occurring in the environment, in society, in culture, in the economy, and who express concern and the desire to create a better world for themselves, for their children, for their family, for their community, for their church, their synagogue, their mosque, their company, whatever it is. I mean, that's the natural tendency of human beings. It's a wonderful one. It's innate. And so the progression of books you read, there's more actually, but to me, writing is about the interaction between my innate curiosity about what is going on, what's happening, and how does it work, and the desire to connect to other people and to other readers. I'm actually a very shy person. I'm not really an outgoing person. And so for me, my way of connecting to the world is through the written word. And so it's, in a sense, you could say passive as opposed to aggressive. And I'm always trying to create an opening or for somebody to enter and really have a realization about the world they live in and how it works or how it doesn't work in a way that they might not have had before.
Okay. And can you give people just a bit of an update on Project Drawdown and Project Regeneration? Because we've talked about them; they're now out in the world on their own. What's happening with them?
They've both been they have new EDs. I think Project Drawdown is, and I take responsibility for that, not the people who are there today, is still around solutionism. And I feel like by creating Project Drawdown myself, starting in 2013, that I take responsibility for that. But at that time, Terrence, I mean, there was nothing out there about what to do. And we were getting more and more information about what was going wrong with respect to the atmosphere and to global heating. But the solutions were, I mean, there was a paucity of references or places you could go to that would give you advice and some suggestions and ideas about what you could do as an individual, a neighborhood, a community, a school, a company, a corporation, a county, whatever. I mean, these are all levels of agency that exist. There's others I haven't named, but the point being is that unless all levels of agency are engaged and involved and so forth, then nothing's going to happen. And if they don't know what to do, then for sure nothing's going to happen. And so that was the birth of Project Drawdown, was to measure and model the most substantive solutions. And this is the important part, to reversing global warming. That's what drawdown means. And at that time, up to now, we're still talking about net zero, which is, by the way, a physical impossibility. But talking about net zero as if there is this point in time where we can exhale, we've accomplished it, we're so cool, we've done that. That's not even remotely true, by the way. And we'll get back to that. But the idea that somehow we just ladder step up to this point in time in the future, where we have quote fixed the climate, is just beyond absurdity in terms of science. I'll just leave it at that in terms of physics, in terms of climatology, in terms of how greenhouse gases work, how the earth works, and so forth. So I see drawdown now as wonderful and excellent and as being, it continues and very useful. And I don't gainsay any of those solutions or the people who are doing them and executing, not at all. But what I'm trying to do with Carbon, the Book of Life, is actually, can we step back and look at the narrative? Can we look at the conversation we're having? Can we look at the terminology and the vocabulary? I just mentioned net zero being one of them. Because actually what emerged out of the climate movement, and however one wants to describe that, is from science, it's from NGOs, it's from governing bodies, it's from churches, it's from many different entities. What has emerged as a narrative is simply, well, first of all, it doesn't work at all. And second of all, it's actually incorrect. There's no energy transition. There's no net zero. You can't decarbonize. We need to recarbonize. There's no carbon neutral. I mean, it's jargonized to the point where, 99 point whatever percent of people in the world just, well, whatever, they must know what they're doing because I don't understand what they're doing, or those words don't mean anything, or they're not relevant to my life. And so I feel like conversationally or narratively, the climate movement has failed, not for lack of good intention and sincerity in good science. That has been there. I don't question that, anybody's intention. But for the simple act of understanding, how do you connect to human beings the way they are now and what faces and confronts them on a daily basis? If we're not connecting, then all we're doing is being right. Well, it's like being right in a traffic accident. It doesn't matter if you're right, you're in a wreck. And so we've been right for a long time, but we have been really extraordinarily, inept at our communication. And I write. I mean, I love English. I love the English language. I read it. And so that observation, that watching it and seeing it, even seeing that I'm part of that with Project Drawdown, has led up to the book Carbon, the Book of Life. And but just one thing about regeneration, project regeneration.
Let me cut in for 1 second, Paul, which is that when I look back at our conversation about regeneration from 2021, and in that one, I had asked, how do your books sort of, what's the pathway of the different books? And you pointed out that each one, as you got to the end of one, it seemed to call forth the next, or set up or demand the next. And so this, what you were just doing there, talking about drawdown and now a bit about regeneration, I think takes us to carbon.
It does, but I wanted to mention that before I said pen to paper on drawdown, I knew I was going to do regeneration because, that was solutionism, but actually the only path, and I'll say this without question, forward for humanity is to create more life on Earth. That's it. And life means children, it means obviously ecosystems, it means the ocean, it means culture, it means native wisdom, it means education, it means our food system. I mean, it goes on and on and on. To regenerate
art.
Well, art is an expression of that. Yeah, can be expression of that. But yeah, and if we're not creating more life, literally, then we're actually going the wrong direction because what's happened. I mean, when you read the headlines or you read the stark ignorance, of the current administration, I mean, it's not ignorance, actually, it's beyond ignorance. But if you read about that and you read the headlines in the Times or the Post or the Guardian or whatever, wherever you get your news from, regardless of that, what you're seeing is that we've hit the end of the road. You can see the end of degeneration. We're in a degenerative society and economy and system, and it's killing people, places, source, seed. It's extracting and destroying. Okay. we've done that pretty well for 500 years, but we can now see the end of the road. That's what this is about. And so what you do at the end of the road is you better turn around and look the other way. And that's regeneration, because degeneration has a very short half-life now.
Okay, so that led to regeneration, as you say, which you knew you had to write while you were at work on Drawdown.
Before I started writing Drawdown, I knew I was going to do that, because I knew,
Okay,
you know,
and
you
then
know,
the path from regeneration to carbon. I'm going to have you read the first 2 pages of Carbon, but first, the path from regeneration to carbon, and it's both in terms of what you saw, but also what you felt it was your time to communicate.
well, I saw the same thing with regeneration, which is that the word got made into what I call a weasel word. Sustainability is a weasel word. Now regeneration has become a weasel word, which is being used by companies and brands and products and in any way they want to, because it's a cool term. It's used by, well, we won't talk about who's using it, misusing it, but the point being, and so the language has been demeaned in some way in terms of its original meaning. So Carbon, the Book of Life, was not to go after that misuse of the term so much, is to expand our sensibility and our awareness of where we live and who we are, and that relationship, which doesn't require the word regeneration, because when you start to immerse yourself in what is the reality, which is we live on this planet, and there's 3.4 trillion creatures that are Earth mates, and there's 8.7 species, and we're the only species that dysregulates the climate. The others do not do such a thing as double glaze the planet. We've learned how to do that ourselves. And so to just open up that, not to gainsay regeneration or gainsay drawdown, not at all, but to actually open up the aperture, if you will, for people can see, not so that they're deciding or figuring out or receiving, like information about what they should do, could do. I've read a lot of books, Terence, that is sort of, the underlying message is, I know, you don't, listen up. And I'm weary of those books. And so Carbon is not one of those books. It is about, wow, look at where we live, and can we redo our imagination about carbon itself, because we have treated it like it's the bad boy. It's going up there, it's doing these things, we have to capture it, and we have to liquefy it, and we have to pump it into geological formations, and we have to somehow it just doesn't exist in that way. And so carbon is a flow of life. You have 1.2 trillion carbon atoms in every cell of your body, and you have some 34 or 5 trillion cells, and you can do the math. I think it's 44 octillion, something like that. And just numbers that mean nothing at all, okay? But what means something is switching our sense of carbon as the thing than as a flow. And the flow of life, without which there is no life, because it's the only element that has memory and can store energy in a chain. No other element. Phosphorus can't do that. Sodium can, nothing. Just carbon does that. So now what I'm trying to create is a kind of appreciation and what's the word? Reverence almost, for what this flow of life is in us. And
I would say a simple word like recognition.
Yeah.
Just recognizing, looking in the mirror, if you will, and seeing carbon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to tell you, which I mentioned to you a bit offline, but that I found carbon, which is only, well, you did it in words, but even in pages, I think before you get to the notes, only 193, which I appreciate. But it's dense, it's compressed, and a bit challenging. And I just want to put it this way. You tell so many compelling stories about so many individuals, discoveries, innovations in many different fields. So the amount of new information that I was getting per page was really high. And we know this is partly the nature of your approach, but it's also by design. You wanted to cut out the padding and so on. And in preparation for doing these conversations, I usually read a book fairly quickly. I take notes. I'm thinking about the conversation. And so that's what I did with this one. But I felt I would rather, and I will go back and read a couple of chapters. And then a couple of days later, read a couple of chapters so that I'm immersing myself in what you say is the commonality of the chapters, which is this new perspective. But I'm taking in all that information that you're offering me in a way that I can kind of sit with it and digest it. And first, you can give me your response to that. And then I would like you to do something which I don't often do, but when I feel that someone has really worked hard at crafting, a little chunk of their book, I want you to react to what I just said, and then read the first couple of pages to let people get a feel for what they'd be walking into in this book.
I'd be happy to as in terms of its length or compression, I was always taught that brevity is the soul of wit. And I just see a lot of blah, blah, blah in books. And this book has been praised many, many times for the lack of extraneous words. In other words, that it just gets to the point and says it and moves on. And I think our attention spans have all been shrunk hugely by the world we live in today. And so I was trying to speak to that. Yeah. So chapter 1 is called Carbon, by the way. And there is a quote from Bayo Akomolafe, who a friend and an amazing, you should have on the program sometime. He's an extraordinary human being, a Nigerian poet and psychologist. Says, there are things we must do, sayings we must say, thoughts we must think that look nothing like the images of success that have so thoroughly possessed our visions of justice. And so that's how the book starts, with Bayo's quote. And Carbon moves ceaselessly through the 4 realms, the biosphere, oceans, land, and atmosphere. It flows in rivers and veins, soil and skin, breath and wind. It is the narrator of lives born and lost, futures feared and imagined. It is the courier coursing through every particle of our existence, the interwoven lattice that permeates cultures, lagoons, mines, grasslands, organisms, and our temporal life. Carbon's dance of life does not take sides. It is never right or wrong. It is a timeless path that endlessly unwinds before us. Like Ariadne's thread, the flow of carbon is a story that may allow us to escape the labyrinth of anxiety, ignorance, and fear the world bequeaths. Carbon's increase in the atmosphere moves in tandem with the loss of the living world. The book of life encircles what has always regulated climate, the pulsing living mantle we call Earth. Like you, I take in the news, the science, the confusion, the broken politics, a world unfurled, fearful, at wit's end, shrouded in shallow certainties. To better understand the riddles and luminosity of life, I chose to go far upstream to headwaters and look at the flow of life through the lens of carbon. Rather than bemoan the plight of the world solely through forecasts and portents, I turn to voices who see the planet absent the overlay of threats. Might there be wisdom domes as well as heat domes? There are women and men merging observational indigenous wisdom and Western science into a different understanding of our place on Earth, a perspective that reveals what we do not know. Certainties are dissolving. They are being replaced by unfathomable complexity. Though carbon comprises a tiny fraction of the Earth, a planet without it is a dead rock in space, like a sky without stars, a symphony without sound. We have reduced carbon to an errant element, the culprit in a civilization bent on self-termination. The crisis of a warming planet, rampant injustice, and collapsing biodiversity form a whole. Carbon, people, and nature are set apart as if they were independent. Carbon is a window into the entirety of life with all its beauty, secrets, and complexity.
And thank you.
Thank you.
One, because I do think that that gives people a sense of where they will be going when they enter, but also because, as I said, it's clear that you labored and crafted that entry point. How would you describe the book? And let me just say what I mean. Once you set out that, what you end up doing is your chapters are on different aspects of life, aspects of existence, energy, food, forests, fungi, language, as just examples. How did you sort of choose which things would get focused? Because what you're doing is you're creating kind of this large tapestry. And were there things that you considered and said, not a chapter, not you get where I'm going? Because it's interesting to me. For instance, I was most surprised by language, or there is the one called Bucky and Bing. Just a little bit about that process.
Well, the exclusion is the sea and water. And the reason is out of respect, not exclusion. And that is, it's so voluminous and it's almost like another world. And so that was a set aside for sure. It's in the coming book. So I'm writing a new one now, but which is called Upstream, by the way. That yeah, the fable of the river upstream. But anyway, the point being is that I took areas where I felt like somebody either has involvement, or how many people have actually been around deforestation? Not so many. How many people understand it in the movement? Many, many, many people understand the perils and damage deforestation is causing in this country, in the Amazon, elsewhere in the world. So primeval is the name of the chapter, but it's about forests. So I try to make it relevant that people could get engaged, because there's some connection. Obviously, there is in food. And food is actually 2 chapters, not just one. The food system is where actually human beings have probably the greatest effect on the longevity of our stay here on the planet, because it comes from agriculture and soil. I wanted to, as you know, I mean, the chapters, so food is called Eating Starlight, so that it takes it out of the mishigas of all the nutrition and this and B vitamins and analyses and all our nonsense that goes on, especially in LA about diet and food. I'm sorry. It's like,
yeah, actually, to see what Erewhon has become, right, Paul?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, look, have fun, don't bring your checkbook. And but I also so I want to say you're eating the energy of the sun. That's your energy. It didn't come from the supermarket, or from Campbell's soup, or from potato chip or your latte. It came from the sun. So again, what I'm trying to do is connect people to the world that they live in, upon, within, and so forth. So that's Eating Starlight. The second one is Sugar Salad, and that came from experience I had with McDonald's. When they first introduced salads, and I had sort of ripped them online when they came out with their first sustainability report, and shredded them. And I knew the people there. I mean, and they came back to me 2 years later and said, we're doing our second one. Would you read it first? And I said, sure, and give us your comments. And so they flew out to Sausalito. And I had prepared. And what I prepared was the ingredient list of 5 different foods. And then I asked the gentleman, what were they? There's all the ingredients. Can you tell me what the food is? And they said, no, I can't identify it. I said, well, why don't you try again, because you sell them all every day. So then I showed the gentleman from McDonald's, the nutrition panel, which is on the back of every single package of food in the United States, the protein, carbohydrates, added sugars, all that sort of stuff. And I said, which is the double cheeseburger? And I looked at him and they said, this is a trick question. I said, it's not a trick. This is just your data. I'm not tricking you. And they said, well, the high calorie one is probably the salad, right? And I said, bingo, 1,400 calories for a salad. That's the sugar salad. And they took it off the menu a year later and said, because we are slimming down. But the point being is really about the fact that we're eating non-food as well, and it's carefully engineered. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't somebody fooling around with different ingredients. It was created by organoleptic scientists, and they knew exactly what they're doing and how to add food to make it as inexpensive as possible to produce and as addictive as possible to the consumer. And that's why 73% of the food we eat today is mostly engineered. That's called ultra processed foods, but it's not just ultra processed. Ketchup's ultra processed. So what? It's got sugar and tomatoes in it, and vinegar. Not a problem. You eat it, you don't. That's called a UPF too. But most of the UPFs are things you just keep putting in your mouth, chips and things like that. Or you put them in, you eat them, and you think, oh, I love it. I'll eat it again. Why do you love it? Why do you want to eat it again? It's been engineered for that to happen. So food is a big thing because it really relates to soil. And then there's a whole chapter on soil called Dark Earth, which is can we just look at this one again? Because again, we treated soil as a medium, as you put chemicals and things in it, and then corn and soy and wheat and things come out of it, and then we sell it. Actually, most of the corn, not the plurality of corn in Iowa is made into ethanol, by the way, not food. But to really look at soil as an organism and to really step back a little bit and say, look, there's 5,000 cultures that are here that we know about. And every one of them is called the Earth Mother, Madre, Mother Earth, Mother Earth. We do it too, Mother Earth. Why? Because that's where life comes from. All life comes from. No matter what you see, take, hold, fix, imbibe, whatever. And so the profound disrespect that has occurred, by wanting to create more and more, using chemical stimulants, NPK, and just to know that the N of NPK, the nitrates, really came from trying to make better bombs, before World War I by the Germans. That's what they wanted to do, just lower the cost of nitrates. And then our pesticides came from the gases that the Germans used, poisonous gases, in the war as well. Okay, so that's where pesticides come from, and so the origins are just like disturbing, put it that way. But what we've done to soil is basically destroy it. And if you put a probe down into healthy soil, some biosphere reserve, where nothing's ever touched it, in terms of, mechanical or chemical or anything, but just like a forest. And you put it down there, you hear this amazing, amazing amount of sound. I mean, it's a beautiful sound, and it's different everywhere in the world. If you put that same probe down in Nebraska, in a corn soy farm, in Iowa, and so forth, you can listen all day long. You won't hear a sound. Now, it's dead. It's dead as could be. Now, some people say, yeah, well, it's alive. You're hearing all these critters and worms and, that are in the soil making that noise. That's true, too. But what I would say is that we have a lot of creatures inside us too. We have 40 trillion creatures called microbes outside our eyelashes and our gut, everywhere. We think we're an organism, but we think soil is not, because it has microbes and, it's a biome. It's a biome. And we're treating it like it's a thing.
Wow. And I think the two sides to what you just said. One is, I think most people do not realize that we
considering ourselves a unity of something, a unitary subject, if you will, are actually we are a biome. We are coexisting with the things, and as you point out, there's so many wonderful little revelations woven throughout it, but that basically what we think are us, inhaling, digesting, all of these things, it's actually the life of the microbes in us that are doing those things, kind of. I mean, it's to me, it's an awfully eye-opening way of looking at things.
We literally, every breath we take, no matter where we are, contains DNA, microbes, viruses, etc. We are breathing in the living world, whether we like it or not. We even did it with COVID masks, but it's still going in. I say the only individuals that exist are in comic books and Westerns. There is no such thing as an individual the way we could think of an individual. Now, do we have boundaries? Yeah, just like a cell has a boundary. We have skin, we have barriers for sure. And they're there for very important reasons in all animals and creatures. And even a microbe has a barrier, but not to confuse the barrier with our identity.
Right. Let me tell people this is Freeform, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with Paul Hawken, entrepreneur, author, founder of Project Drawdown, Project Regeneration, about his latest book. And as we've discussed, it's really a step back, a widening out, a change of perspective. Carbon, the Book of Life, and you can learn more about his work at Paul Hawken. That's HAWKEN, paulhawken1word.com. Yes, so we talked about food, we talked about fungi. Each of these things, it seemed to me, what you're doing is you're reminding us where we live, reminding us what we are part of, pointing out things we probably have missed, have been distracted from, and so on. With it all, it doesn't have it's not a legal argument, A, B, C, D, conclusion, E, but it all delivers a deep message. And that message for you is what?
Well, you talked about becoming more familiar with where we live. Actually, what I'm suggesting is we have no idea where we live, where we don't know. That's what I said at the very outset. Remember, science is discovering what we don't know, as opposed to being, smug about this and, unpublished, is peer reviewed, and there it is, and so what's happening with this new, crop of scientists, women and men are coming out of the universities and really listening to traditional ecological knowledge. That is observational science. Our science is empirical. And they're meeting and listening and discussing and respecting each other. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a classic example of that in braiding sweetgrass. In other words, it's not making something wrong, it's making it bigger and more expansive. And like I say, we don't know where we live, literally. I mean, a scientist, a botanist, took one kernel of rye, one little kernel, planted it, and then basically counted the roots using an electron microscope. And he counted 14 million roots. Actually, I had his students help him too. So it takes a lot of work to count 14 million roots. And 4 million were hair roots, so put them aside, there's 10 million left. And each of those roots, 10 million roots on a little kernel of seed, are going down, and they have hyphae on them. Hyphae are the interconnection between the mycelia and the plant root. And right there is a transactional moment, really, because the plant is telling the mycelia, I need some nitrogen, I need phosphorus, I need zinc, I need selenium. It's telling it what it needs. The mycelia is saying, give me your sugar, give me your carbs. 30+% of all the carbs plants metabolize go down into the roots. And for transactions, and for breaking down bacteria enzymatically to release minerals. But the mycelia then somehow understand that and then get it from some other place and transport it to that root. This is like a marketplace. It's like people coming in and going and so forth. What we know now, though, from Adamaski's work at the Royal Society, who has been recording the sounds that mycelia make. Now, these are 2-3 cells thick, okay? These mycelia, some are thicker. You see the little white things on the soil sometimes, but that they speak or they communicate or whatever verb you want to call it, but it's click sounds and clicking sounds, just like the San people in Botswana or the sperm whale. And it's a clicking. And then he recording, and then he said, hey, there's patterns here. There's a series of clicks like Morse code, for example, that repeat themselves. And there are sequences of repeating words or clicks, combinations of clicks that actually sequence as well. And so he's saying, look at these are sentences. We would call them sentences, and they're as complex as Indo-European language. Okay, this is mycelia. and so in this communicating the rye seed and this and that, we're going, wait a minute, that's just one little kernel of rye. And so we have no idea what's going on down there, is what we know now. What we know is what we don't know, is what I'm trying to say. And that should give us a sense of, I hope it for me is like, oh my gosh, of awe, of wow, as opposed to, oh, it's just grass, it's ryegrass, whatever. And we'll put some fertilizer on it and cut it and mow it, fine. But when you're eating bread or rye bread or even wheat, the same difference and so forth, you're taking in the nourishment of something that is extraordinary, and too well.
I by the way, I did an episode with Zoe Schlanger.
Yep.
About the light eaters.
Excellent book. Excellent.
Yeah, which basically takes what you put into a chapter or so and does a whole book. But remarkable stuff about, and it is interesting as you pointed out, sort of introducing what you were just saying, that it is the combination, the interaction between observation, often in indigenous societies, but available to every child who walks into a garden, and science, and that the more sensitive our science becomes, the more it tells us what we don't know, is my sense.
That's exactly right. And what I love about Zoe's book, which is excellent, she's been 8 years talking about this. Okay. I mean, she really, really did her homework, and some of the best botanists in the world today. But at the end, there is a thing about science, botany certainly, but all the sciences, which is that every scientist, in order to make their way academically through the institution they're involved with or any other, has to publish. And to publish, you need peer review. You need older, more established scientists to say, stamp it in a sense and say, yep, this person did a good job, and I, okay it, approve it. And the problem with that is that the older scientists tend to be more locked into paradigmatic ways of seeing the world that change very slowly. What Zoe Schlanger in Light Eaters is, and she talks about at the end of the book, is talk to botanists who are established and very well respected, but who dare not really try to publish what they said to her, which is that the only way we can understand a plant is that it's a brain. There is no other way to explain everything we do know about plants in terms of communication and internally, externally.
And the word that I came back to over and over again in reading that book is agency.
Yeah.
That plants and this stem of this plant and this flower of this plant has agency. It makes choices and it takes actions to satisfy needs.
Yeah, the plants have been here longer than us, of course, and animals, and they have 20 different senses. We have five. And the difference is they can't move and we can. And so we need different senses than they do, or at least the preponderance of them. And so they developed sensibilities and ways of communicating that are entirely suited to those who are the plants today. And that was the ones that evolved. That's what's around us. And so I have redwood trees here, and I have about 30, I forget how many, but really from my house to the carport, and I walk by them every day, and some of them have 8-9 foot circumference. I mean, they're pretty big trees. There's a second growth, but still pretty darn big. And when I read about the sensibility that trees have, that is the fact that they can actually see in a chiaroscuro way, kind of something moving past them. And I'm going, wait a minute. In other words, every time I go to the carport, all 30 some odd trees see me or sense me, I think is probably the right word. There's a movement in front of them. And I have not been reciprocating. And in other words, I'm just going by, I'm used to them, they're there, they're just, and I was like, it made me walk very differently, just like an awareness that I'm walking within awareness as opposed to being the sole awareness.
That's right. No, I think the work that's been done on mycelia and fungus, the work that's been done on plants, and by the way, folks can go back and listen to that conversation with Joey Slanger. But the point that Paul was making, which is that it is, of course, about plants, but it's also a lot about the world of science functions, and how the boldest, most outrageous, perhaps the most helpful pathways and insights are not necessarily encouraged, because it all takes place in a system that isn't just about discovery. We're getting close to the end. I wanted to ask you just to I'm going to read a couple. You in this book, it's your expression, but you give others quotations, and I just wanted to read two of them and have you reflect on them.
Sure.
So one is from Robin Wall Kimmerer. We need more than policy change. We need a change of worldview, from the fiction of human exceptionalism to the reality of our kinship and reciprocity with the living world. The planet asks us that we renounce a culture of endless taking so that the world can continue. What I want you to do is why you chose that quote and what the sort of surrounding meaning for you is.
The surrounding meaning for me is that we earlier talked about the climate narrative, the climate movement. The climate movement presumes that if we have enough solar panels, enough wind turbines, that we get to net zero, that we direct air capture, we have these 20 million machines, that are sucking carbon out of the air, that we have carbon capture systems on the flues that are burning coal gas or whatever, and we collect all that and so forth, that we get a hall pass to the next century. And what I'm saying is, I'm raising my hand and saying, wait a minute, what about consumption? What about extraction? What about the taking? What about like you haven't addressed that at all. And so there's a tacit assumption there that if we just, live in Atlanta and put on, 30 different solar panels, and then we can continue to live our 10,000 watt, kilowatt per day lifestyle. It's like, it's just not true. And so that's what I love about that Robin Wall Kimmerer quote, which is, if we're not addressing what we're taking, if we are not looking at our footprint, our personal footprint, and in some areas we can't control it, I understand that, but step by step, societally, and as people, as communities, if we're not addressing what it is that we just take for granted in terms of our lifestyle, then we're not serious.
Right. If business as usual has gotten us to crises like climate crisis, crises like the breakdown of our representative government, take what you will, then maybe business as usual is the problem, and not just each of the manifestations of when business as usual goes wrong. Oren Lyons, you have a great thing where he is sitting in a meeting and he's quiet. I forget what the meeting was exactly about. Oh, it was about, I guess, about resources, about relations to the environment, or so on. And I'm just going to read what you say here. Oren Lyons, a faith keeper of the Seneca Turtle Clan, was quiet. In the spirit of inclusion, the moderator finally turned to Lyons for his thoughts. He said, "In our culture, resources are relatives." What's the context of that one and the meaning for you?
The context for that is that we are in a culture that is objectifying every single aspect of nature. We see climate change. You use the term, right, on the outset. Climate change, really? Climate is always changing every millisecond, and without which we would not have seasons, number one. Number two, you can't fight climate change. You can't fight it. It doesn't care what you think, and it's impossible to fight it anyway. And you can't tackle and combat it, all that sort of stuff. You can't be Don Quixote. Don't be stupid. In other words, we're the problem. That's not the problem out there. Every time we say we're going to fight it and climate change is a problem, we are reifying a mindset that caused the problem, which is to objectify people, places, nature, creators, pollinators, water, sea, everything. So unless we really shift that perspective, then we are on the path to doom, because that is the cause of the problem. So you can't have the mindset that caused the problem be the cure for it. And so that's why I love Oren's thing. It was a natural resource conference, natural resource as opposed to what? I mean, and he was just saying, those are relatives, which was, we don't make a distinction. We don't separate them and so forth. And that's why the Chickasaw, most indigenous people don't have a word for nature, because they don't understand what you're talking about.
Right. I remember maybe 30 years ago when it occurred to me that I was looking at the mechanical worldview versus some sort of an organic, living worldview. And I thought that the general story that most people act on is that reality is dead, static, and separate. And when in fact, reality is alive, dynamic, and interdependent.
Yeah, and every child is born with that knowing. And then we do a very good job of educating them to make sure that they forget that.
I want you to read the last 2 pages. That's okay. How we'll come to an end on this.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Wendell Berry, a great poet and author, Wendell Berry counsels us to be joyous, though we know all the facts. Although humanity faces what appears to be an insurmountable endgame brought about by ignorance, aggression, and greed, we also live in the most brilliant period in human history. Renewal results from disturbance. There are astonishing breakthroughs arising from the breakdowns, ways of seeing and acting in the world that bring swaths of humanity back to life. The gift that rests at the heart of the myriad crises is newfound purpose. Everyone craves a life of meaning. Regenerating the world is the journey to possibility. Vistas open. The diverse voices, social organisms, and entities now emerging worldwide are rehearsing the future. As I wrote this sentence, a swallowtail butterfly flitted through the window, its wings gently fanning the air above the keyboard, and it flew on. Change and wonder, doubt and fear walk hand in hand. This is the nameless era. It was predicted, but the common fate of prophecy is to be ignored. The juggernaut institutions laying waste to sea, land, and people cannot endure. Top-down corporate solutions for saving life on Earth are well-intended, but will fail because nature is not top-down. A beginning is near, a threshold, and so too is an end. Without fail, meaningful change begins with one person, one idea, one aspiration, one audacious dream. Uniqueness is your birthright. It is the seed of community. Plant it and see what happens. Pessimism and gloom are cobwebs. Brush them aside. We seek rapprochement with Mother Earth, what Stephen Harding calls the vast and mysterious primordial intelligence that gives birth to all that exists, all that sustains us. We eat, drink, love, and breathe because of this mantle of life. Do we cherish it or lose it? You can't be both cautious and courageous. We must choose. Focus on what is in front of you. Give yourself permission to fail. Leave room for foibles, humor, and giggles. Find restorative movements you can sing and dance to, lest creation plays to an empty house. Beliefs do not change our actions. Actions change our beliefs. Complex realities begin as simple acts: enchantment, humility, respect, imagination, and constant gratitude, which offer wider apertures to the living world. Monica Galliano suggests that we stop playing God and instead play midwife. We can't save the planet. It'll save itself. It is innately regenerative. We are invited to honor the world that is right in front of us, because the living world is your best friend. Where you are is where you are most effective. The power to act does not lie elsewhere. Fundamental human rights and needs must be met. Everyone on earth comes first. There is no second. Revive, honor, and nourish the wild and bountiful lives that forever astonish us with their splendor and grace. The movement to restore life on earth is not a repair job. It is transformative, an entirely new experience of self, the visceral awareness that our life is coincident with every other being on the planet. Our intention and reward are the same: to experience and express the irrevocable connection to all beings. It is our only way forward.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I especially love those last 2 pages. Where I would ask, a final word or something, that is it for me. So again, the book is Carbon, the Book of Life. The website to learn more is paulhawken.com. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to terrencemcnally.net or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. To receive my weekly email announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and links to 10 or 15 articles usually to flesh out the conversation, email me at temcnally@mac.com. You can sign up to get the podcast at my site or at most podcast sites. You'll find years of podcasts at my site. I think they all have about 400 or 500 of these.
Wow.
You can follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. Thanks to Kiana Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos of Progressive Voices, and most of all you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely. And finally, thank you, Paul Hawken, and keep up your good work.
Thank you, Terrence. A pleasure, a joy.